What's going on, guys? Today we're looking at tonal values in our artwork. So tonal values are the range from light to dark in our image, right? And how we separate those planes. So with our concept art or with our artwork, with our landscape artwork, we've got our foreground, midground, and our background, right? The background is what's right at the back, midground is what's in the middle, and the foreground is what's closest to the viewer. Right, and the way that we're going to separate those is we're going to be using a light background. Here we go, we're going to be using a light background, a medium tone midground, oh, a medium tone midground, so I just duplicate that color, and a darker foreground. So let's just make this a little more interesting. Just throw some pyramids in there. Here we go. And a darker foreground. Yeah, so that's like the basic, that's like the really basic piece of landscape artwork. Yeah, so that's like as pretty much as basic as you can get it. But within that really basic landscape artwork, that gives us everything that we need to wrap our heads around in regards to value systems in our landscapes. Your lighter background, your medium tone midground, and your darker foreground. But within that range, we have to be very careful with the value systems that we use, because we don't want to create too much contrast while creating our artwork. And as you start off creating landscape artwork, you always kind of think, yeah, I want to do like something really highly contrasting. You know, you want it to look really, you want it to really pop, and you really want things to stand out. But the problem with that is, let's have a quick look at that. So if we've got like a really light background, a midground, so there's our nice midground, and then a much darker foreground. Yeah, we get a high level of contrast, but the problem with this is that we've got a massive amount of fighting for attention. Like, the background wants to say hi, how you doing, then the midground is like, hey, I want to say something, and the foreground's like, let me talk, right? So we're getting this massive argument and confusion and conflict between our layers, between our well, they are layers in essence, but between our planes, between our foreground, midground, and background, there's a lot of conflict, right? So by having a more harmonious palette, or a more harmonious range that we work with, and then work within those ranges, then we can avoid that conflict, right? And the image itself will be easier on the eye, right? So we've got our light background, we've established a nice medium mid-tone, which is still within the same kind of range as what we've produced for our background. And the same with, it's exactly the same with the dark. Let me just change my brush shape slightly. There we go. Yeah, and it's the same for our foreground, you know, or for our dark tone. It's, yes, it's darker than the rest, but it is still within that value system. Right, so let's have our, there we go, that can work as our midground. There we go, and as our foreground, let's add some shapes in. So we're just throwing in real randomized shapes just to establish our planes. Now we've got numerous weapons in our arsenal when it comes to making our 2D plane, which is our, you know, what we're working with, appear three-dimensional. You know, we will be looking at those at a later date, but just to start off with, I want us thinking about tonal value. yeah, and how we can make sure that we create harmony in our artwork. So we're just looking at black and white right now, right? So here you can see it's a little more complex than the one previously, but again, it's still very simple. It's just a series of you know, of irregular shapes. Yeah, when we've created that, right? So what's the next step? Because those are, you know, those are flat block colors. What is the next stage after that? Well, the next stage after that would be to, you know, define our light source and start working with what we have within our tonal range to create a sense of three-dimensionality to what we've established, you know, as our foreground, midground, and background, but sticking to that tonal range, right? So there's our midground. Let's throw in some nice cool objects for our foreground. And as you guys can see, these are just literally just really random shapes, just to create a sense of here we go. All right, so now we've got our foreground, midground, background established. How do we then give this that sense of three-dimensionality? Because yes, we've got you know, we've got that good separation between our foreground, midground, and background, but now we need to work within what we have, and to do that, then we need to identify or create our lighter, medium, and darker tones. Well, we've got our medium tones, our lighter and darker tones within these value sets, so the individual value sets of the foreground, midground, and background. So we've got our, we're going to start off with our foreground. So let's establish our light source. So Alt and click just to make sure that we've got the correct color. We're going to bring it up slightly. And you can see the comparison between the two, just to establish our light to area. Now what you've got to be careful of is that you're going to start getting some level of conflict between your foreground and your midground, but you still want it to be established enough that we can identify a difference. So that's not terrible, but I think we can go a little bit lighter and still not have to worry about it hitting the midground there. Here we go. Right, and that's just going to allow us to just establish our light sources being over there to the left. And we could create a sense of three-dimensionality in our images or on our planes. Again, just keeping it quite randomized. Right, and then the same thing with the darker tone. So we've established our lighter, and now we're going to establish our darker tone to show where our shadows are being cast. Now look at this. That really jumps out, right? Now that is because that is too dark. So that's gone outside of our value range, right? So see where that was all the way down here. So we're going to bring it, but not so far down. So that's where we start off. And we're going to bring it down slightly. See, so that's still a bit high. Get back. Select. Down slightly. Let's try that. See, again, way dark. So you need to really pick up the sense of what is working and what isn't. See, now that, I think we can live with that. And so we're just establishing our areas of shadow. We make these little rocks. Let's change the brush. And so now those can be Nice shadows being cast in the underside of that rock. And just very simply, just by establishing that tonal range on that plane, then it helps us to solidify that sense of three-dimensionality that we had to our image. And we could do the same thing for the midground. So we've got our main color selected, slightly lighter variation, following the same light source because it's the same image, so I want the light source to remain consistent. And then with our established shadow, so again, remember, because of that, what we call atmospheric haze, as our image recedes into the background, we definitely don't want our background to be contrasty. Ew, look at that, that's way too strong. So let's make our selection of our color, and we're going to bring that just down ever so slightly so that there is a difference. That's like a super subtle difference. I'll maybe take that a little darker just so we can see it. And all this is doing is literally just establishing our tonal values, as we said before. Yeah, so using that light source as our guide. Yeah, just to establish a solid sense of the third dimension. Cool. And even with our background, right, we're going to work within the same tonal system. So if we wanted to do clouds, we went right the way to white and threw them on there. But you see how that just jumps out? It's way too strong. So again, we're working within that same tonal value system. Bring it up slightly and create our clouds. Yeah, so it's that sense of harmony that we want in our image. Okay. You can, you don't have to work within that medium tonal range. You can work with, in order to say, it would be like a darker key. So you can have the darkest tone on that image as your background. That could be like your lightest, and then your midground is darker still, but you're still within the same tonal range. So that could be your midground. And then your foreground can be darker still. All within that same tonal range. There we go. Yeah, so it doesn't have to stick to that kind of medium kind of range. It can be, we can work in a much darker or lighter key. So again, you can start off very, very light, and then our mid is very light also. And then our dark is still quite light, but of course darker than our mid. Sorry, our foreground. Yeah, so it's just working in different keys, but still taking the same concept of working within a specific value system. Yeah, and then that value system will allow you to create a piece of concept artwork that is harmonious and that doesn't fight for attention. So if you guys look back at the landscapes that you created, is there harmony? Are the planes separated, or does it feel quite flat? If it feels quite flat, it could be a lot to do with your tonal range and your tonal values, or your value system on your piece of artwork, right? You should be able to kind of look back, zoom out of your piece, and it still works. But if that's not happening, if it's looking very flat, then this is, you know, your starting point. You know, so I want you guys to experiment using the grid that I've created for you all. Watch over this video as many times as you guys need. Just worry about doing really simple shapes. Don't try and come up with an overall concept yet. Just as you saw me doing, just messing with shapes to create a harmonious image in regards to tonal value. All right, that is what I want you guys focusing on. Don't worry about color, don't worry about anything else. Just get your head around that, because once you get your head around that, and we cover color and we cover perspective and everything like that, then it will all fall into place. Okay, all right, good sketching, guys.